Welcome back to the Body Composition Coach podcast. And let me just tell you this, that's the second time I have said that today because I've already recorded this podcast once and you can probably clearly tell by the fact that I'm having to record it again, all did not go to plan. For those who currently live in the UK, you will probably know that now is around the time of a heat wave. When I'm recording this, there is a heat wave and my camera overheated. So 20 minutes into recording this one, we had to give it some time to cool off. So we're back again, and I'm hoping I'm going to get through the whole thing this time without without my camera deciding that it's time to have a bit of a siesta and cool down. So hopefully this isn't all in vain. Hopefully I'm going to teach you something today or give you some mechanisms you can use to help with snacking, and all of the pain I've been through this afternoon is going to be worthwhile. Welcome back to the Body Composition Coach podcast. And as always, let me remind you that a review goes a very, very long way. If you could just let me know what you think of the podcast, give me a 5-star review, because obviously it's going to be a 5-star review, right? So give me a 5-star review. Let me know your comments. Let me know your thoughts. Like, share your views with me. I genuinely really, really value them because it actually inspires me to create more of these podcasts and give you more information and more help on different subjects. This exact topic has come from feedback that I've had from you guys. So let's get stuck into it, shall we? So I suppose how I want to frame this podcast, well, actually how this podcast has ended up being framed for you is going to depend on a couple of things. And it's going to depend on how you personally view the word snacking. So when I say the word snacking, that's probably going to lead you down one of two paths, right? So just think about that. Snacking, I'm saying the word, think about it. Where does that take you? Does that take you A, down a positive route, topping up your protein, topping up your fiber, topping up your hunger if you're struggling from like a hunger point of view, bridging the gap between meals, a treat on an evening that gets you through the day with something to look forward to, all really positive stuff, right? Or did actually the word snacking take you down a bit of a negative connotation, uncontrollable, spiraling, off plan, ruining your week, wrecking your weekend? Which way did you go? I'm just interested to know. And actually in the comments of this, whether you watch on YouTube or listen on Spotify, just leave it in the comments. I'd be really interested to know where you initially went to start with. Because there's a big difference between the two, but like, it doesn't necessarily, there's a difference between the acts. It's a difference between the psychology and the perception of it, right? Because let's say a handful of nuts. If I just say a handful of nuts to you, that could be one, really positive. It's fiber. It's got a little bit of protein in it. It's reasonably healthy. There's micronutrients in it. You could see that as a positive bridge between meals. You could see that as a handful of nuts that you really didn't need, you didn't really want. It was just sat on the side. You helped yourself to it, and now it's all spiraling. It's all gone wrong. You see the difference. So the kind of thing that bridges the two things here for me, and the thing that's going to run through this whole podcast, is intention. Intention is the difference between whether a snack ends up as a good, quote unquote, good connotation or a positive connotation within your mind, and whether it ends up as a negative or bad, quote unquote, bad connotation within your mind. So let me set the scene for you, and this will make a little bit more sense. So you get home from work. I was going to say 5 p.m. It's probably not 5 p.m. for most of you. It's probably like 5:30, 6 p.m., maybe even 7. You finally got through the door, and your first thing you do is you walk into the kitchen, you put your bag down, maybe in the dining room on your way through, and you go to the cupboard, you open the cupboard, there's a bag of crisps that's kind of a big share bag of crisps that's kind of part open. The kids have been nibbling on those today. So you help yourself to some of them, and then on the side, one of the kids has had, a bit of a snack in a bowl that they left on the side. It's not quite finished. So you finish that snack for them because you can't leave that on the side. And you also end up seeing a packet of biscuits on the dining room table that the kids have been eating today as well, and you go and help yourself to a couple of them. But then when you've had a couple, it becomes 3 or 4 because, they actually taste really good. It's probably like a chocolate hobnob or something like that because obviously, they do taste really good. So that's gonna get out of control. So if we take that into account, you can see how you can view that in quite a negative way, the way that I've said that story. But let's just flip it for a second. Let's say that actually you come through the door, you go straight to the cupboard, you go for the protein-based pudding or the protein bar, or you have a bagel with some carbs and some chicken for some high protein to top yourself up with some carbs and some protein and some fiber. You go for the handful of nuts because you need to get some healthy fats in and a little bit of protein and some fiber to bridge the gap between meals. You see how you can make those occasions look very, very different. And the difference between the two is always going to be intention. Like having intention to your snacking. And that for me is how you solve this whole conundrum and this problem. But before we really get into how to solve it, because I'm going to help you with not even solving, I'm going to help you with reframing snacking and making it a positive thing for you. But before we do that, we've probably got to understand hunger a little bit, because if we don't understand hunger, a lot of what I'm going to say is kind of going to fall on deaf ears a little bit, right? So there's three main types of hunger. There is the biological type, the type where you're in a calorie deficit, your body genuinely does need calories, you're struggling a little bit, you are really hungry. And don't just assume, by the way, just because you're in a calorie deficit, that it has to be biological hunger. It doesn't. But this is one thing, right? Your body telling you, I do not have enough nutrients to hold myself together and survive. I need you to give me something, right? That's biological hunger. The second type of hunger is, not really hunger at all. It's learned appetite. So it's, I'm used to eating X amount of calories, or I'm used to eating at certain times of day. Now I'm hungry. Give me the food, right? And you might recognize this. You might always eat at 1 p.m. and when it gets 12:30, you get absolute starving. Your body knows it is getting close to that time to eat. Okay, so learned appetite. The same thing if you normally eat 2,000 calories and now you're eating 1,500 calories, your body's used to eating 2,000 calories. It's going to let you know you've dropped your calories. This ain't right. Okay, and then third is the psychological pull, or the psychological style of hunger, let's call it. And that's going to be your patterns. That's going to be when you're stressed, when you're tired. They're going to be psychological versions of hunger. And to be honest with you, that's the one we're going to mainly touch on today when we're talking about patterns and changing patterns. And that's probably, well, they all play their role, actually, to be fair. But I'd say if one of them was going to be the most dominant reason that people snack, I'm going to go for the third one. I'm going to go for psychological pull. I'd say that's probably the most regular reason that the women that I work with tend to snack on things and they struggle. And that's the thing we'll try and attack a little bit later down the line. One thing that I do want to touch on, just because I know that most of my audience is female, most of my client base is female, I don't want us to ignore the hormone element here. Like, I don't want us to forget about parts of your cycle where snacking is going to be a little bit worse. For example, during your luteal phase, that's generally going to be the case for most, although not everyone works by kind of textbook. And then bearing in mind things like perimenopause and menopause, how that's going to change your kind of hormonal balance, and that will then in turn shift your kind of cravings and your hunger cues slightly too. So we do have to acknowledge that stuff, but it doesn't particularly change the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about today, especially when we're talking about like the psychological pull of food and the psychological pull of snacking. Now, the best way that I can lay this out for you when it comes to the psychological pull of snacking, and don't forget, I'm going to remind you, the whole thing that drives a line through this whole podcast is intentions. So we're going to keep revisiting intentions when it comes to snacking. So like I said, the best way that I can kind of lay this out when it comes to psychological hunger and psychological cravings and appetite, and when you, let's say for an example, when you, on an evening, you sit down to watch TV and you're just like in the bag and you just can't get yourself out of it. That sounded like some sort of drug habit. I didn't mean that, but you know what I mean? The bag of crisps. I don't know what else you can keep in a bag, but you know what I'm talking about. So what that looks like is usually it's like a 3-step process. Cue, routine, reward. So the cue is the pattern, if you like. So, or part of the pattern, or the trigger of the pattern. So the cue might be you sit down on the sofa at 8 p.m. The routine might be where every time I sit down on the sofa at 8 p.m, the routine is that I have a bag of crisps or some chocolate or whatever it might be. The reward is exactly that, right? You consume it. So cue, routine, reward. This happens a lot in different scenarios. Let me think of some more. So maybe you get to work, you stick the kettle on, and there's always some biscuits on the side at work. You always have a biscuit with your cup of tea, right? You put the kettle on, while the kettle's boiling, you have a biscuit while you wait. Cue, routine, reward. Getting home from work, the example that I used earlier. You get in from work, you go straight into the cupboard, you help yourself to a Twix. Right? Cue, routine, reward. You always get in at the same time. You always go to the cupboard straight away. there's always Twixes in there, and then you consume it and you have the reward. So this is generally how the psychological element or the loop of the psychological side of hunger tends to work. So every time you do that, every time you complete a full pattern, you cue, routine, reward, every time you do that, you almost reinforce it. And this can go on for months and years. The best way that you can rewire this is to disrupt this pattern. If you notice a pattern, and you'll probably be thinking about this when you're talking about snacking, when you're thinking about snacking, if you notice a pattern, we are going to need to be, what's that key word? Intentional in disrupting that pattern. Let me think of an example for you. Let's say that normally when you go to work and you put the kettle on and you're waiting for it to boil, you have a biscuit because they're always on the side. Here's what we're going to do instead. You're going to get into work, you're going to go put the kettle on, you're going to go straight to your desk, and you're going to just open your emails up and start reading your emails for the day, right? Maybe not the best idea because you're getting into work a little bit earlier, but you've got to do something different. Maybe it's that you come in and you don't put your bag down, you go straight to the kettle, you turn it on, then you go put your bag at your desk, right? Just break the pattern. Another example would be, let's say you always sit down at 8 p.m. and you always have a snack when you do. Right, you always have some sort of food. Maybe instead of having food, you buy yourself some decaf coffee, right? And what you're going to start doing at 8 p.m. when you sit down is you're going to have decaf coffee while you watch the TV. You're just breaking the pattern, something different. Or maybe instead of sitting down and having the snack at 8 p.m., you're going to go for a walk in the evening, right? I'm not saying walk instead of snacking. Obviously, that sounds great, but in reality, it's not going to work, right? But I'm saying break the pattern that you're normally in. If you find yourself stressed, if you find yourself tired, for example, something I've used with a client before, anytime she gets off a stressful work call, we agree she's going to do a 5-minute walk. That's it, just 5 minutes, right? Because what we notice with her is that when she gets off a stressful work call, she dives headfirst into whatever it might be, a bag of Maltesers. We've got to break the pattern. We've got to do something differently. When we're talking about psychological hunger, we're talking about cue, routine, reward. We need to break the cue and break the routine bit of that. We've got to disrupt the pattern. Every time you follow through with it, every time you do it, you're just reinforcing the pattern. It takes a long time. You've probably reinforced this pattern over many, many years, maybe months or maybe years. We've got to disrupt it. And that will take some time too. There will be times where it doesn't go very well. And that's, okay, that's fine. But we have to keep trying to show up, keep trying to reinforce it. And over time, we can reinforce a new pattern, a new behavior, and break the old one. So another kind of part of the psychological picture that we're talking about here when it comes to the snacking side of things is probably the stuff that happens on like autopilot, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be cue, routine, reward, or it kind of still is, but it can be where with being so unintentional with our snacking, we end up taking bites of food off the kid's plate or off the husband's plate, unfinished, like leftovers, just having them. While we're cooking, we're just constantly tasting stuff. We're putting cheese in something, cool. One slice for me, one slice for the dish. One slice for me, one slice for the dish. You know what I'm talking about, right? So every time we go to a meeting, for example, we're maybe just grazing on biscuits because we're concentrating. We're focused on what people are saying, or we're pretending to be, right? And we're eating the biscuits while we're there. But we're grazing. And what tends to happen in these moments is we start to spiral, right? So you'll notice that when you have a bite of one thing off one of the kids' plates, maybe they've left loads of smiley faces. I used to love them when I was a kid. Smiley faces, you might just have one. You're like, I just have one of the smiley faces off a kid's plate. And then it becomes 2. And then it's 3. But, there's chicken dipper. Bit of protein, fine. I'll have that. But do you see what I mean? It starts to spiral. And the same thing in the meeting where you're having just like, I'll have a biscuit while I'm listening to so-and-so give their presentation. And then suddenly it's like six chocolate hobnobs down, 4 custard creams, and you're lost. You've lost the battle, right? So the grazing element can start to spiral. And again, it does just fall back into the same picture that when you're being really unintentional, you're being spur of the moment, you're being like, I'll just pick on that, or I'll just graze on that, or I'll just have a bit of that. It starts to create a spiral and it gets out of control. And believe me, this can be anything from like 100 to 200 calories worth, but it can work its way up. I've seen people in nutrition plans that have been like 1,500 calories down of just like uncontrollable spiraling when they're grazing. So you'll see that I keep looping this back to the same thing. Intentions, When it comes to the spiral that happens when you're snacking, it's always because we are unintentional with our snacking. When it comes to the patterns that we create, accidentally create them, it's because we're unintentional with our behaviors, our actions, and our snacking. So at the very start of this podcast, I asked you a question and I said, when I say the word snacking, do you view this as positive or negative? I would bet quite a lot of money. Not everything. I don't want to go broke here. I'm sure there's always exceptions to every rule. But I would bet quite a lot of money. If you had negative thoughts about snacking at the start of this podcast, the stuff that I've just said to you about the patterns, about the grazing, about the spiraling, will all make sense to you. If you had positive thoughts about snacking, it probably doesn't. You're probably thinking, I don't have any of these problems. I don't do this. And it's probably because you do something very, very well. You snack intentionally. So those people who did have negative thoughts, you're going to learn a lot here. Those people who didn't have negative thoughts, this is just going to reinforce the positive thoughts that you already had because you're probably already doing this. Let me give you some examples. Every snack, for people who view snacking in a positive way and use it positively, is usually intentional. It does one of a few things. It bridges the gap between meals. So let's say you eat your lunch at 1 p.m. and you have to wait for your husband to get home. So dinner's at 7 p.m. At 4 or 5 p.m., you're 3 hours from lunch and 3 hours from dinner. So you have an intentional snack. That intentional snack probably has some protein in it, probably has some fiber in it, probably has lots of volume to it. So there's plenty of food for your money or food for your calories. That's very intentional. You've been intentional with that snack and you see it as a great opportunity to top up fiber, top up protein, add volume, bridge gaps between meals, suppress your hunger. Great, right? And you see it as a positive thing. The food doesn't always have to be healthy though. For example, one thing that I do on an evening is I always have a snack. I actually shared this with my clients the other day. I was talking about my snack bowl, and if any of my clients have listened to this, they'll remember from the live call I delivered. And I was talking about my snack bowl. It's very intentional. Every evening I have a snack bowl. The contents of that snack bowl vary. Sometimes they're healthy, sometimes they're not. But within it is very intentional things. I know what calories are in it. I know what the macros are in it. I've made decisions based on what I fancy in terms of sweet and sour and savory and salty and whatever it is. It's intentional. It's an intentional snack bowl that I look forward to throughout the day. It's not necessarily healthy, or not every content within it is healthy, but it is intentional. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for that snack bowl every evening. Believe me, I'm thinking about it now because I'm talking about it, right? So just because you're being intentional doesn't necessarily mean you're being quote unquote healthy. It can be something that's not like on plan, or it doesn't have to be high in protein, high in fiber all the time, but it does have to be intentional. The other thing that is going to help you when it comes to being intentional is your environment. So if, for example, your cupboards are full of stuff you just cannot resist when it comes to having a snack, it's going to make being intentional a lot more difficult. It's actually going to make you more unintentional because you know it's there. You're going to come in from work and you're going to be really intentional because you're going to have your healthy snack, your protein, your fiber, and whatever planned out. Right, 4 p.m., that's when I'm going to bridge the gap between meals. I'm going to be intentional. But you see the kettle chips in the cupboard and you see they're open. Someone's been digging into them today, right? So it's very, very easy then that you start picking on that stuff straight out the bag, not being intentional with it. So your environment, you can see there, can affect how easy you find it to actually follow through with the stuff we're talking about. I'm just going to say this how it is. If you struggle with snacks being around in the house, with snacks being in the cupboard that you just cannot keep yourself out of, don't buy them in. And I know it's easy to come back to me because I know what you're all screaming now. Or maybe internally. Don't actually be screaming this, right? But internally, you're probably saying, well, I have to. The kids love it. The husband loves it. True. But what if, let's say you cannot get your head out of a bag of Maltesers. And the kids love Maltesers, it's true. But the kids also like a Snickers. Or the kids also like minstrels. Or they also like jelly babies. Right? believe me, they're not going to be that fussy. Well, maybe I'm missing the point there. Maybe they are. Maybe they're really fussy, right? But in most instances or some cases, they won't be that fussy. Do yourself a favor. If it's not the kids, if it's the husband, you probably just need to have a word and be like, listen, I know you love this stuff, but can we just make it so that when you're going to have that, when you're going to have your Mars bar in an evening that I can't, I end up having half of, can you just go and eat it somewhere else? Just don't eat it in front of me, right? Or go to the shop and buy one and don't keep them in the cupboard so that I'm not helping myself to them throughout the day. However this looks for you, look, your family life is very personal. It looks very different for everybody. But there will be things you can do to your environment that are just going to make your life a little bit easier. And here's the other thing. When we talk about environment and we talk about being intentional, the environment around your snack is also equally as important. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about here when you're talking about an environment around a snack? So I'm talking about, I mentioned my snack bowl earlier, remember? With a snack bowl, there is a guideline and some confines, is that the right word? Some boundaries that I'm working within. And it is the size of the bowl, and it is the bowl itself. I'm adding unhealthy snacks to this bowl, but I'm adding certain amounts and I know the calories of them and I'm portioning it out and I'm putting it on a bowl and I'm putting everything else back in the cupboard and I'm going to sit down in a different area, maybe a different room to eat that bowl. Is that intentional or not intentional? Of course it's intentional. The difference would be if I took those bags of snacks and just went and sat on the sofa with them and like, oh, I'll just have a handful of each of these. I bet you don't. If you put them in a bowl or you put them on a plate, you call it what it is. It's an intentional snack. You go and sit down with it. Believe me, I'm not saying this is the way you solve all of your problems, right? And you'll never want to go back to the cupboard. You probably will at some point. But what you're doing is adding a barrier between you and that graze and that spiral that potentially could happen. You're plating it, you're not grazing it. And it gives you a much better opportunity, a much better chance. It gives you a decision to be made, not just being reactive to things. So you'll see here that I've kind of covered a few different elements of this. Now, most of this whole conversation comes back to the psychological element of snacking. It's not that snacks are good or bad. It's not that if you have celery sticks and hummus, that's a good snack. And if you have jelly tots, that's a bad snack. That's not really how you need to view this or how I want you to view this. I want you to see it as intentional or unintentional. Everything can serve a purpose within your diet and your nutrition. And that purpose might be it's just something I look forward to at the end of the day, and that's cool. Just be intentional with it. If you take the unintentional side of snacking out and you make every snack intentional, it can be intentionally healthy, intentionally high in protein, intentionally full of fiber, intentionally very voluminous, so that it helps you with your fat loss, your muscle building, whatever it might be. Or it can be intentional in terms of bridging a gap. It can be intentional in terms of giving you joy because it's something that you like, but make it intentional. Don't be reactive with it. Other than that, the best way to approach this is if you're noticing patterns with your snacking, if you're noticing that you are, getting hungry at certain times. Sorry, not getting hungry at certain times, but let's say you are sitting on the sofa at 8 p.m. and that's your cue to have X snack, or you are getting into the office and turning the kettle on and that's your cue to have Y snack, or if you're getting home from work and you're going straight to the cupboards and opening it up and seeing what's in there, that's your cue to have Z snack. Do something about it. Replace the snack, buy something else in, change the activity, change your daily habits and routine, go for a walk, do something different. Break the habit, break the pattern. That's the key to disrupting it. Every time you follow through the pattern, you reinforce it. Stop reinforcing it, break it, do something new, something different. That might be have a decaf coffee, it might be have a Coke Zero, it might be have a Sprite Zero. I don't know, something different. You know your patterns, you know what they look like. Do something different and disrupt the pattern. Be intentional with your snacking. So listen, hopefully this was a slightly different spin maybe than what you've heard on snacking before. And that's always what I aim to do here. I don't just want to give you the, oh, well, if you're hungry, eat some carrot sticks. Yeah, okay, cool. That would be great in theory. It's just not how the real world often works, right? But the best thing that you can do with your snacking across the board is make it intentional. As always, if this podcast has been useful for you, we got through it without overheating. If this podcast has been useful for you, please leave a review, leave a comment. Let me know. Did you have negative connotations at the start? Now you can see it as a positive one. Were you positive straight away? And actually, this has just reinforced the way that you use snacks in your own life. But look, either way, I will see you on the next one.